the last two Identities of Season 5. One of them will be quite lengthy. It's why I saved it for this one. Next we have manager of La Manchaland Don Quixote. Sancho was asking Don Quixote what he was thinking. Lourdes the barber asked Sancho what she was doing, telling her to stab him. Gregor the priest was plagued with guilt. Don Quixote was asking what Sancho was thinking at that precise moment, as the family that once loved him was impaling him, who once loved them in return, with those brutal stakes. Lourdes was shouting at Sancho to stab him now, and Gregor was still plagued with guilt. Princess Rodia told him to know that he was the one who had wronged them, abandoned them, and the whole family. Sancho was asking Don Quixote, what was he thinking? What was his thoughts swirling in his mind as the outpouring of curses and condemnation, strained by both wrath and hatred, strike his ears? Sancho told Don Quixote to rouse himself from the dream. His reply was silent. Yes, only silence was there. She then asked if it was in his fury against them that had sealed his lips. It wasn't. It was his cast-down gaze as a state sinner that does so out of guilt, like a criminal who has no words left to say in their defense. What happened to them? Where did that begin? The answers to both questions were in plain sight. It was the day when a stranger knocked forcibly upon their gates. The day that Don Quixote's eyes began to twinkle with interest. When during one family gathering, they collectively agreed that they'll help their father achieve his dream as the night's tales of adventure began to pull him in. Every little insurmountable wall of discontent between himself and the rest of them. The responsibility was his alone. He abandoned them. Sancho heard the echoes of Don Quixote's jovial laughter from the end of the hallway. Next to him stood the Knight of the White Moon, who had taken her place. She hid behind that pillar, peering at the pair. She recalled the words of Don Quixote, the one who used... he was using and practically impaled her heart with a stake. Metaphorically speaking. Saying, I am no longer in need of your company. Please, divert your care to La Manchaland and the rest of the family. Look after them. Sancho saw this as language spoken plainly. No pretense, deception, or intentional embellishments veiled those words. Seeing his words shared casually over the breakfast table one morning as gentle and affectionate as every other word of his. She wished to have faith. That Don Quixote sent her away because he cared for her. She overheard a tale which blood fiends were no longer bound by their yearning for blood. Where a clement, selfless hero protected them all. A tale in which humans and blood fiends coexisted. Smiles abound in paradise. A tale in which they must embrace the dream to seek and reclaim their lost tomorrows. That he sent her away because she clearly didn't show any interest in those laughably absurd tales, believing that he valued her time, that the decision was made out of love for the family, despite the silver tongue of the night of the white moon infecting his mind. This faith she hoped to install within herself, yet as she peered from behind the pillar as they bantered, she couldn't perish the thought that she was simply making excuses for him. Little chuckles peppered in between light-hearted chatter, both swirling happily inside a little world of their own. Sancho then asked if he truly found the tales of that human that riveting. She saw that Don Quixote was dreaming a new dream, discarding the old dream that he'd imbued in them when he saved them from the gutters. The euphoria brought upon by this newfound dream was lost on her. But her and the rest of the family. This was a accumulation of their worst nightmares. How much longer can their sanity endure this exitless nightmare? She still sees it, past the darkness of her eyelids, a vision of a past she lived not so long ago. Memories of her own family members who had gone mad from long suppressed instincts. Sancho remembered the day when Don Quixote deemed their sin unforgivable. Their sin was of seeking happiness as blood's fiends should, by bringing harm to humans. In her hand, that wielded the lance which was commanded there by Don Quixote's orders, lingered a foreign and unfamiliar sensation. Her own thoughts were feeling distant from her. How did she feel as she buried their still living bodies into the ground, as she tore through their skulls? She opened her eyes and looked at her sweaty hands. She wiped them dry. She gazed as at Gregor the priest's area, which was still bright at such a late hour. Don Quixote's dream isn't what sustains them now. It was Gregor's desperate words of consolation in the face of endless pain. The halls echo with Don Quixote and the knight's laughter. She has an intense hatred for that now. She moved towards the confessional as though her feet were possessed. She asked Gregor how the consultations went. He hesitated, but he told her that it's no different from the usual. All were at peace, tranquil, as they always were. Sancho wasn't fooled. She understood what was really happening. She could see the splatters of his blood in the room. It came from his back. It was rough and torn, with fresh wounds, on his flesh. Yes. The whip on his desk was surrounded by dozens of uneaten humo bars. Sancho could see that something was starting to fester within all of them. It affected Gregor the most severely. He stood alone before the flood, taking the outpouring pain, suffering, and hatred of the family, instead of Don Quixote, rotting inside more than anyone else. Sancho told him to cancel some of his consultation appointments. He tried to argue, but Sancho told him that he can send them to her instead. She'll lend her ear to their troubles. Sancho asked if she would. Sancho understood that taking on that responsibility alone would break him before anyone else does. Gregor was distrustful of Sancho, yet he told her to not hesitate to ask him for assistance, should any questions or difficulties arise. Sancho saw that despite his distrust, he didn't seem to refuse her help. Yes, he seemed desperate. No other words were needed between them that could alleviate this. Sancho stood there for a time, trying to come up with the words, but there was nothing. When she tried to, When she turned to leave, Gregor called to her in a peculiar tone. Gregor was reminded, and he told Sancho that Don Quixote was preparing to leave them on an adventure. Sancho knew of this, seeing this as the Night of the White Moon's doing. Gregor added that this adventure was a quest for a legendary helm. He could hardly wait, based on the idea of it. Sancho, with some hesitation, asked what he knew about this. Sancho understood that Gregor was acting overly secretive. She looked straight into his nervous, wandering eyes and asked in an interrogative tone. They weren't that close, but she knew him well enough to ask him what he really meant there. Sancho understood this to mean a plan. Gregor was questioning the wisdom of sharing this with her, but he confirmed that Roger was masterminding the plan and saw no danger in telling Sancho. She couldn't imagine that it would be a despicable plot of filial impiety, something so unthinkable that any that would hear it would have had an intense hatred for even considering the idea. Gregor told her that it was all for the happiness of the family. The idea was shared to her by none other than the priest. Her instincts told her to take this up with Don Quixote. The confessional was a sight of madness manifest. It cut through her heart. When the priest succumbs to madness, it's only a matter of time before another blood fiend would have to take his place, all alone, shouldering the burden from the entire family, while the same fate would come for any who would take their place. A slow descent into madness for more and more of them. She questioned if she could be made to bury more of them, to crush their skulls. Was this the future that Don Quixote dreamed of? Sancho didn't think so. He changed, due to being twisted by the Night of the White Moon, even as the family promised to hold their thirst, to withstand it, to dream together, crumbling. Don Quixote was being irresponsible. He was going on an adventure, believing that they'll just withstand this. While he does this, seeing this as proof enough. Sancho understood Roger as one that conspires a sin of filial impiety, an unthinkable transgression. But she wants to hear her out first. Gregor told her that she's in the process of wrapping up the last parade of the day. Sancho knew where to go to put an end to that chaos, to the parade area where her blood fiend sister resides. Rodia understood from the look in Sancho's eyes that she knew everything already, asking if Gregor let her in on this. Sancho saw that there was an elaborate parade surrounding the procession path, where humans, laughing and clapping delightedly at the parade, their eyes holding no trace of fear that they once installed in them. At worst, there was polite and innocent affability. Even the hunters, who once hated them enough to the point where they would throw their lives away just to kill a single one of them, now made an exception to them. All it took to perpetuate that idyllic reality was their sacrifice. The sacrifice was only theirs. Sancho saw it as Don Quixote's ridiculous juvenile dream. It was all becoming real, though starting to acknowledge it. Roger saw this dream as one that made their every waking moment a nightmare. Sancho gave nothing away, but Roger saw this as Sancho not changing at all, saying that she'd agree with Don Quixote regardless. Yet Sancho told her to do as she will. Sancho saw no meaning in happiness if they're all excluded from its meaning. She knew the answer now. The happiness that Don Quixote saw in his ideals was meaningless to them. There's no glory in gazing on the human's happiness, while they stand on the ground in which their family was buried, made into corpses by their own hands to free them from their madness. Rodia wanted her to confirm what she said. Sancho told her to do it. This was encouraging to Rodia, which was enough to overcome the fatigue. This was the last thing that Rodia expected, reminding her that this is filial impiety. She thought that she'd be more opposed to that. Sancho justified this by saying that Don Quixote abandoned them, and that plan came from her. She had to look after the entire family, while Don Quixote was absent, chasing his hollow dreams. Rodia was silent from the shock of this. Sancho told her to focus on the plan and leave the care of the family to her while she does so. Rodia thought that she was still so disinterested in everything happening before her eyes. She likes how this Sancho is now. She told her to go to the barber, she'll explain everything. She was the architect of the more intricate parts of this plan. Then she understood how she might react and decided that it'd be best to go with her. It'll be easier to smooth things out that way. Sancho agreed. When they arrived at Urtis the barber, Rodia told her that Sancho was in. Urtis was surprised by this development, but it was welcome as this would reduce the risks involved in their strategy, even though this was one of the last things that she was expecting to happen. Rodia asked Urtis that she might pretend that she cares little about them, but she kept watching on the rest of the family in her own way. Urtis saw that her disinterest in her perfect dress she once made for her was a mask to hide her deep interest in the sartorial arts. Before Sancho could answer, Urtis made it clear that it was a light-hearted jest, as she was silent the moment that she stepped into the room. Do not be concerned about this. Sancho was willing to try on her dress next time, but now she wanted to learn more about her plan. Urtis told her that they planned to place the helm of Mambrino over Don Quixote's head. Rodia received intel from the relic peddler that kept swindling Don Quixote. Urtis saw that the relic could make the wearer be seen as an equal in the eyes of the beholder. Sancho understood this to mean that the revulsion from hurting a higher kindred can be nullified. Urtis confirmed that this is precisely the case. If she was to see someone wear the helm, she'd perceive them as a third kindred. If either of the second kindreds were to do the same, they'd appear as second kindreds. Rodia understood that it has a similar effect on humans. A king will see the wearer as a king, and a knight will see the wearer as the knight. Sancho saw the plan as more solid than expected, but the risks were still immense. Don Quixote expended much of his strength creating Rocinante. Even so, he still won with a great amount of strength. While the crutch that the helm of Mambrino represents is there, the knowledge that he's still, Don Quixote will make the rest of the family hesitate to hurt him. Sancho was questioning her doubts. Rodia reminding her that it's the best chance they've got. Sancho understood that they needed to be released from the binding saddles of that nightmare. They needed to drag Don Quixote, who galloped onward at the vanguard of that procession from his steed, Rocinante. Sancho, as she was stabbing him, told her that it was why they turned against him, because in the dark invisible corners of La Mancha land, they were there, suffering silently as their instincts strangled them. Just as he forsook their happiness, they forsake his ideals. They'll seek blood, slaughter every human that they see, and the knight who corrupted his mind will be found and torn limb from limb. Sancho asked if it was his lingering attachment to his dream that could still be realized, or was it the resentment towards them who ruined his dream of coexistence, his retribution for their transgressions? Even as his gaze remained downcast, weighed down by the guilt of abandoning his family, he raised an arm towards them, as though the dream continued still. Sancho was then struck with a terrible premonition. Their preparations were immaculate, ready for almost any possibility, but should Don Quixote not hold back and unleash his full might and decimate his entire family, he'll kill them all, even if they defeat him. As impossible as that sounds, none will survive. Him dying while taking all of them with him was the best-case scenario. Yet she wonders why. Why does he hesitate? The trembling hands gave that away. He motioned the family to stop materializing their weapons. Sancho told them that he's not trying to fight them. They saw a great shadow, more vast than the darkest clouds, begin to envelop the sky over them. A wall of blood around the Manchaland. Rudis understood him as sealing La Manchaland, trapping them there. Gregor seeing this as the retribution that they deserve. Rodia urged calm, believing that they'd be okay. The family panicked. Rodia gave her an odd look. Sancho pushed harder on her lance, impaling Don Quixote's chest. They've all committed the sin of filial impiety, but for them all to be confined there in the Manchaland again for another eternity of suffering. Sancho told Don Quixote to stop this. If he ever loved them as much as they loved him, he'll do nothing. That's his final responsibility to them as their father. The shadow that began to shroud the sky slowly withdrew, growing thinner. This told them that his love for them hadn't changed, his arm slowly falling back to his side. The family sobbed as their father was dead. The tears even came from Sancho's eyes. The plan was a success, but this came at the cost of the terrifying reality that they were without a father. Someone new must lead them. That massive responsibility had much blood and was heavy. It rested on her shoulders. She told the others that should someone come seeking where Don Quixote was, to give this answer, that their father, who galloped towards a hollow dream, dragging his family through brutal suffering, eventually met his end in the dirt, and should someone ask you the question, how will you live on? Assert boldly that you will live on as a blood fiend should. Then, while she bore the responsibility and the guilt, to go seek the happiness that they lost. It was then it rained red. Don Quixote gasped his final breath, and the red droplets continued to pelt over their heads with no end in sight. Sancho saw this as the end of the dreaming. La Manchaland was falling apart. It was the end of the dreaming for everyone, for him and for her, along with everyone else. The crimson rain fell from the cumulus of broken things. The blood overflowed, flooding the land before the ground could claim it. Clearly, in this case, it's similar to One Who Shall Grip Sinclair, where in his case, he embraced the role that One Who Grips Faust gave him, instead of his rejecting it. Yes, in that case he joined N-Corp's Psycho Division. With Don Quixote, or Sancho as she is there, instead of leaving La Manchaland 200 years in the past, she remained there and sided with the others. Yes, clearly Nicolina the barber was right. Had she been there, she would have sided with the others as well. Well, this is because, unlike the main version, she wasn't interested in the tales of Bari, Knight of the White Moon, and wasn't as close to Don Quixote. And so when he left Manchaland in the care of his family, she was displeased at being disregarded, and so she joined the rebellion. And this resulted in La Manchaland being destroyed 200 years earlier, freeing her family, which she was the head of now. Yes, free from the torment that the lack of blood which was imposed on them by Don Quixote. While Don Quixote tried to seal away La Manchaland, as the main version did, that Sancho killed Don Quixote to protect those that mattered to her. Well, yes, Sancho in this universe considered that to be Rodia, Gregor, and Utis, along with the other blood fiends, while in the main universe, this was Dante and the Damned Dozen. In both cases, it ended with tears of sadness. Although before she killed Don Quixote, Sancho had no regret in her eyes. As far as she was concerned, he had abandoned them and betrayed them. They didn't betray him. Although in both cases, La Manchaland's existence was tied to Don Quixote's life. If he dies, it dies with him. Don Quixote synergizes with the other Bloodfiend identities as her attacks change, depending on which attack she uses from the others. Well, as for the aftermath of the successful uprising and takeover, I suspect that the Knight of the White Moon of that universe will have a tough battle, as Sancho is unlikely to want to fight fair as the new mother of the Manchegan family. Sancho will also need to rebuild how her family operated, to something more to the approval of the other families, which likely is defined by hunting the humans and feeding on them. Finally, we have Sunk Association East, Section 3. Don Quixote asked the interviewer if they found this to be acceptable, as she's in the middle of a meal. The interviewer understood how busy association fixers were. They hoped that they weren't taking up too much of her lunchtime. Don Quixote told them not to worry, only the most heartless would refuse them, in spite of their manners. Carmen saw that Don Quixote fixed her grip on her chopsticks as she reassured the interviewer. She was eating noodles and vegetables. Someone was telling another to get their over there. Yes, to get back there, rather. Around them, white chairs, utensils, and all kinds of miscellaneous items were being flung around in the background. Don Quixote saw this. Well, a meal was a meal. Then she asked the interviewer if they're putting themselves in unnecessary risk in that Kazan, or a tavern. The interviewer saw this as not a rare sight to them. They worked in an association gym when they were growing up. Don Quixote saw them as brave, warning them to watch their head. The interviewer thanked her for that warning. Don Quixote saw this as good. She'll answer her questions. Carmen saw that to a passing viewer, who might only catch a glimpse of her composed discussion with that reporter, this might appear as nothing more than a peaceful discussion over lunch. But they were surrounded by utter destruction, brought by an ongoing tavern brawl, despite neither of them having anything to do with them. If they weren't dodging projectiles, it could be forgotten that the entire Kazan was where fighting was happening. Well, a fight was taking place. The interviewer was trying to run a special on the Sunk Association, focusing on comparing the Sunk Association branches to one another. Don Quixote saw this as true. The Sunk of the West and the South have gained notoriety among the press. The interviewer saw that she always tries to keep up to date with the news. Don Quixote saw it as indispensable to a true fixer to remain aware of what goes on in the world. Carmen saw that Don Quixote thought for a moment about mentioning how she only reads the section discussing fixer businesses, but she didn't feel it necessary to mention that. She knew better to leave certain things unsaid. The interviewer had heard that Sunk West, where their HQ is located, and Sunk East, where she works for, operate very differently. What differences might there be? Don Quixote didn't visit HQ as, well, she's heard much. They always carry a sword with them. They're bound by countless rules, such as traditions on how they must wield their rapier. In the East, the Sunk are free to fight as they want. Some wield weapons, others don't. Don Quixote raised her waist, or rather her wrist. She wore a thick, luminous bangle, or a bracelet on her right wrist, like it was carved straight from solid jade. The interviewer identified it as virescent pyrojade. Don Quixote confirmed this. It superheats her gloves. Most other materials melt before its heat. The interviewer understanding that it's why she doesn't throw her gloves. Don Quixote confirmed this as the tradition on how they declare duel in HQ. In the East, it's different. They politely state their name and affiliation before engaging in combat. The interviewer was aware that around there, that's how it works. Don Quixote found a certain charm in the methods of the West and the South. The interviewer saw that they were about to ask something that's not exactly relevant, hesitating to speak. Don Quixote invited them to speak of this as she was sampling the delicacy. The interviewer observed that she was shaking her leg like that for a lot, asking if there's something wrong. Yeah, she was shaking her leg a lot. Don Quixote denied this, seeing it as an unshakable habit of hers. The interviewer saw this as a sign of anxiety. Carmen saw this as more frustration. She couldn't intervene in the fights that she was observing. If she was free to do so, she delivered justice to defend the losing side. But the Sunk were proxies in duels. Don Quixote was expecting her to be contracted to duel around now, seeing that potential client has delayed in making this request. This confused the interviewer. Don Quixote asked if being an audience to a one-sided fight was annoying. The interviewer understood that she wanted to fight one of them. Don Quixote wanted a fair fight. There was no justice otherwise. Yet her hands were tied as she can't act without a contract. Carmen saw that she stopped talking. Then the interviewer remembered a familiar story from the past. A few years before, a complete newcomer to the Sunk Association acted like a vigilante. Don Quixote stopped the interviewer, telling her not to compare her present self to her naive past. She doesn't act at the first sign of injustice. She had learned patience. Then Carmen observed a brawler doing something stupid. They threw a household item in her direction. That brawler unsheathed his blade and tripped on an errant piece of wood on the ground, certain of victory. Unfortunately for him, he began to fall towards Don Quixote, who was forced to defend herself, demonstrating her poise and nonchalance in the face of what was happening, which was quite pointy. Saying this as she demonstrated the virescent pyrojade's capability to melt the material that the sword was made from, where she was gripping onto it, as if it was chocolate on a hot day. The one that wielded the sword was surprised to find a sunk fixer, and Don Quixote confirmed this. This caught everyone's attention. The man on the losing side of this skewed battle quickly ran up to her and pleaded to her to accept his contract. She accepted, but warned that she will charge double for emergency contracts. The one on the losing side was willing to pay triple as long as she takes care of his opponent. She agreed to this, telling him that they'll discuss payment after she's done. She then jumped from her seat as if she was to receive a Christmas gift, telling her opponents that she's from Sunk Association East, Section 3, and that she, Don Quixote, shall accept this duel. I suspect that this version of Don Quixote wasn't found by Virgilius, but instead by someone else, like the Sunk Fixer, where at some point it was likely that she was a Sunk Fixer in the South, like the Sunk South Section 5 Director version, but unlike that version, she wasn't a Director of Section 3 in the East. She was just transferred there at some point. So far, we know about how they do things in the South and the West. In the South and the West, they're similar to how they operate in both attire and how they operate, where they're required to wield a rapier and dress like they're musketeers. In the East, it's quite different, as they're dressed in traditional Chinese attire and are required to have a bracelet made of virescent pyrojade, which is like their unique workshop tech exclusive to them. How that works? It might as well be magic, as I don't know how it works. It's similar to how the courier trunks with built-in weapons being exclusive to the Deviant, and gloves made of material that protects them from its harmful effects, where they utilize this using martial arts. Yeah. As Carl Douglas once sang in 1974, everyone in Sunk East was kung fu fighting. Although, like the Lu Association, they aren't prevented from using melee weapons, considering that she can gather poise and burn. Makes you wonder how the Lu Association operates in the East compared to the South. The East are clearly big on traditional Chinese attire, considering what Jia Zichun and her attendants are wearing. There's also a difference between how they do things in the East compared to the West and the South, as due to practical reasons, throwing the glove to challenge an opponent to a duel isn't practical. It'd be like not using a rapier in the South and the West. Instead, they say, I am from insert affiliation here, I insert name here, accept this duel. Okay, let's conclude this with the general analysis. While the identities of Don Quixote all reflect her desire to dispense heroic justice, as was her personality after drinking from Lefe, the identity of La Manchaland manager, Don Quixote reflects who she truly was without Lefe or Rocinante suppressing her blood fiend traits. As a fixer, she expressed her overzealousness depending on what role she was in. For example, in the Sunk Association, she fought for whoever hired her, adjusting her approach based on the customs. With the She Association, she was more serious due to the pressures of command. As an employee of the Wings, this was expressed in her dedication to that job. With T-Corp, she was an effective time tax collector. While not liking the parts where the poor were dealt with, she doesn't hesitate to target rich tax cheats. With N-Corp, she zealously purged the prosthetic-using heretics without needing the canned rations to brainwash her to N-Corp's way of thinking. With the syndicates, it depends on the syndicate. As one of the Blade lineage, she struggled to deal with drinking etiquettes, while as a little sister of the Middle, she was passionate about her dispensing of judgment towards those within the Book of Vengeance. As for the La Manchaland manager identity, this was her worst-case scenario, what she would have become if she wasn't at all interested in Barney's stories, where she was in on the plan of the others, and La Manchaland died 200 years before the events of Chapter 7. An altogether darker ending of that story, as she was forced to lead her family as the new mother, where they went back to the old ways of the Blood Fiends. The main version of her was much happier, where she found the life that she had there had more meaning in that 1 year that she was part of the Damned Dozen than she ever had in over 200 years. And that was before she was locked in the lighthouse for that long. What was common with all variants, except the La Manchaland manager variant, is that they all have Rocinante, as the others wear that to be able to pass for human. The problem now is that the main version of her can't take it off without going crazy, as Ozzy Osbourne would put it. She needed to get taken down by Virgilius, one of the few times when he's allowed to intervene. How removing them is going to be possible? When she's threatened to be consumed by the combined bloodthirst of an entire family of blood fiends? Well, that's unlikely to be found out anytime soon. Well, that's Season 5's Identities concluded. I look forward to the next season's Identities to find out what their stories are. Until next time, hail the rabbit!